Welcome to Wine with HR. I'm Jules.
Hey there, I'm Trish.
Lawyers turned HR professionals. Through our company, Monarch Endeavors, we guide employers through their oh shit moments with their employees.
In this podcast, we will discuss some of the most common and commonly frustrating HR problems while enjoying our favorite adult beverage, wine.
So sit back, grab a glass if you choose, and join us as we think about and drink about all things HR. Welcome to Wine with HR. On today's episode, we sadly do not have Trisha because she is with her parents who, as our listeners know, have been experiencing some health issues. And that is exactly where she should be. So we just want to send out our good thoughts and prayers to her. Her absence actually fits the theme of this episode really well, however, because it's all about when, how, and why saying no is so important. And I am delighted because we have an expert with us on this very subject, Heather Drago of That's a Hard No podcast, which is also an evergreen podcast. So Heather, I am delighted to have you here. And I think this topic is so important. So I'm going to ask you just to give a little introduction about yourself and how your podcast got started.
Sure. So first, I'm going to correct you. I am not an expert in setting boundaries. I am an expert in struggling to set boundaries.
Okay, fair point.
I'm very upfront about that. It's an ongoing process, #self-aware.
Yes.
So my name is Heather Drago. I am the founder and chief strategist of Clever Grow Marketing, which is located here in the Cleveland area. And I'm also the crazy person who decided to also start a podcast at the same time. As you know how it is as a business owner. It's like having two full-time jobs.
Yes.
So a lot of people ask me, why don't I have a podcast about marketing? And honestly, this came about as a passion project that came out of my own journey, my own struggle. So as I mentioned, I'm a business owner. In November, it'll be 10 years.
That's amazing, by the way. So
thank you. Thank you.
Quick applause.
There was no plan. I have no written business plan. I did not go to business school. I'm an art school dropout. This was not part of the forecast of my life, right? So there's a whole long story behind that. But it is, being a business owner is really, really hard. I once heard the founder of WordPress, one of the founders of WordPress say, being an entrepreneur is the most exhilarating 20 miles an hour you'll ever drive. Which is like, I think about it every day. It's so hard and it's such a slog. And so this came about as part of a struggle. In 2018, my company experienced the most incredible growth. At the same time, my family was going through a pretty major catastrophe and trauma. We had a person in a fire in the burn unit. It was like a whole long, terrible thing. So I had my eyes on my family, which I should have, right? And my eye was not on the business ball. And so my business started growing in ways that I was not controlling. Other people were driving my bus. And there were lots of things happening that I didn't feel good about, didn't feel were right in my gut. But I, was busy elsewhere. But more importantly, I was afraid of confronting people. I was afraid of having difficult conversations. And so at the end of that year, when I was really facing some really difficult situations, some major decisions, I was burnt out. My company had made more money than ever. However, I'd paid myself less than ever. I realized a lot of the problems I was dealing with at the end of that year were because I hadn't said no in the beginning. And I would say, if I hadn't just said no back then I wouldn't be here now. And so especially, it really hit home when I was looking at the books at the end of the year. And I was like, I have got to learn how to say no. So I decided someone had just written a book called My Year of Yes. And I'm like, I need to have a year of no. And I said, this is going to be my year of no. And I made a little sign on my bulletin board, #year of no. And I decided that I would start saying no to one thing every single day, no matter how small. So at first it was things like a client would text me at 7 a.m. and say, hey, can I talk with you for a moment? I used to say yes. I'd be laying in bed and I would call them back. And I got to the point where no, I can talk to you at 9 a.m., right? It could be just saying a no thank you in an email. It could be unsubscribing to something. It could be not answering the phone this minute someone calls. Sometimes it was harder things. I was not comfortable, even though I declared it as my year of no, it was still a big struggle, especially with bigger things where I felt FOMO, especially where like there might be an opportunity, but I really couldn't do it. Like I really struggled with the big things. And I also struggled even with the little things, doing it every single day. But my thought process was, if I do this every day, the muscle will build and I will get more comfortable with it. And it'll just get easier and I'll be able to do it with bigger things. So a couple of things that helped me were writing it down. So I made note of what the thing was I said no to, how I felt in the moment. And as time went on, it got a little easier. I noticed instead of writing down nauseous and sweaty, I would write relieved. And and the other thing was I had an accountability partner in that I had an assistant who worked with me day in and day out. And she would hear me on the phone hemming and hawing about something. And she knew it was something I was struggling to say no to. And she would literally just hold up her hands like in a hashtag symbol for hashtag year of no. And she'd be like, flagging me down, like, come on, say no. And so I would then have the strength to say no. So little things like that helped me, but it honestly was very, very difficult. It wasn't until like May that I was consistently doing it every day. I felt terrible doing it. I felt guilty. I felt anxious. I would lay awake at night worrying about it, hurt people's feelings because I wasn't very graceful about it. Like it was really, really hard. So then by the end of the year of 2019, I was meeting with a client. I had been evangelizing this whole no thing with everybody that I knew. And she said, what is 2020 going to be about? Little did we know. And I said, I don't think I'm done with this. I'm still struggling with this. I haven't really applied it to my personal life. I still think I need to work on this. And she said, no 2.0. And I was like, yes, no 2.0. I love it. So then 2020 rolled around, and in February, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then in March, the pandemic hit. So talk about learning how to say no. It was like graduate studies level of learning how to set boundaries. So I can talk more about that, but then later that year, a friend who also had a podcast sort of put a challenge out there of like, hey, pitch your podcast ideas. I pitched this idea. They helped me produce the first episode. And away we went. So 3 years later, here we are. 3.5? I don't know. I'm losing track.
It's easy to do, isn't it?
It is. So that's how it came to be. It wasn't something I like strategically thought out how it would help my business. So we're going to do a branded podcast. It was just like, this is something I care about. And the more I talk to people in life about it, everyone had a story, everyone shared their struggles. And I thought, like, I don't think we're talking about this enough. So I just put it out there and here we are.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, first of all.
Sorry, that was a long story.
No. It's wonderful. It's exactly as it should have been. But you share a lot of personal details, so I really appreciate that. And I know our listeners will. Yeah, same. I know our listeners will as well. And a part of why I was so excited to have you on the show is I think, as you were just saying, this fear of saying no or this anxiety over telling people no is universal.
Oh, yeah.
And as you said, it's in every aspect of our life. And so I thought, what a great idea to just talk about that to our listeners who typically tend to be HR professionals and managers who probably often feel like they can't say no, and just talk a little bit about that. And I love how you're so open about how crappy it made you feel,
Oh, yeah.
And I want to talk about that some more because I think people will see someone else set boundaries and say no in situations and think, God, I wish I could do that. Because they think that person makes it look easy or, whatever the case may be. And it's not. It's even for people who it looks like it's easy, it's not easy most of the time.
Right.
So just getting that vulnerability out there, I think is great.
Yeah.
But before we dive into all of that, we've got to talk about our WINE of the week.
Yeah.
And you chose something for us, so I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I am a survivor, a breast cancer survivor. And so part of my healing journey is that I no longer drink alcohol, or I at least drink very little of it. I will say every now and then I break down and have a margarita, but we're human.
Right. Yes.
I mean, I need to have something in my life. Come on.
Yes.
So this is called Free, F-R-E, Sauvignon Blanc from California. It's alcohol removed wine. So there's a tiny bit, like a teeny tiny bit, but enough that it still tastes good. And we have it chilled on ice. And I don't know, what do you think?
You know what? I was so glad that we actually had this opportunity to do this, because I have been looking to try some of these non-alcoholic, alcohol-removed versions of wine, because it's not always wine time. Sometimes.
Yeah. It's not always wine o'clock.
It is the middle of the day right now.
Some people are throwing them back at lunchtime.
True. But we're both entrepreneurs. We still got a lot of stuff to get done.
A lot of work to get to, yeah.
So I was very curious. And I have to say that my first sip, I was pleasantly surprised, because I know Trisha tried, I forget what brand it was, but she tried one of these on another episode, and it's probably a good thing we're not on video, because her face was, it was a hard no. A very hard no.
That's one of my no. Yeah.
But this, it doesn't have a word I always use to describe Sauvignon Blancs, which isn't a real word, but is bitey. They said they have that like crispness and that acidity. Yeah, the sharpness. It doesn't quite have that, but it's not as sweet as I expected it to be.
Yeah.
So it is just kind of a nice,
kind of mellow.
Yeah, it does remind you of wine, and it's a good substitute.
It's
I would say
wine adjacent.
Wine adjacent. Yes, I like that.
Yeah, it'll do.
It'll do.
Yeah.
It'll do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see this mixed in a spritzer too.
I was thinking that as well. Yeah.
A little soda, a little juice.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. So in those moments where you can't have the actual thing, or you're on a journey where you're trying to have less alcohol or no alcohol, this might
be a good choice.
Yes. And you like the taste of wine, then this might be a very good choice. Yeah. And as always, we will have the wines that we try on the website, so you'll be able to find it.
Oh, that's awesome. Great.
Yeah. Okay. So now to the WHINE of the week. And as I said, we want to talk about why it's important to say no to things sometimes, even in your role as an employee, a leader, an HR professional, a manager, whatever your role is within your organization. And so we've heard Heather talk about how this started for her, and how, I thought what you said about there were some things that happened that 8 months later you were thinking like, oh man, if I had just said no back then, I would not be in this position right now.
Yeah.
And I think at work, it's really easy for people to, as I mentioned, feel like they can't say no, or to just get in the habit of saying yes, because they think that they need to be the good soldier or the, good employee. And so they just sort of fall into a pattern.
Or people don't think they are allowed to say no.
Yes. I think that's a very important point.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think it is so hard for people to say no?
Well, I just want to speak from my point of view, which is a cis white female, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have my lived experience. So in my experience, women are taught to be caretakers, people pleasers, doers for others.
Mm-hmm.
You are a good, polite girl. Politeness equals good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are accommodating to others, if you're doing things for others, and if you say no, you're a bitch, right?
Yep.
And so there's a lot of fear of saying no, there's the fear of letting people down. People use guilt as a tactic to get you to do things. There's the fear of missing out. I know as an entrepreneur, that was a big thing for me. And even now I struggle. I want to go after this thing, but if I say no to it, will I miss an opportunity to ever work with that client again? But I think in general, we are always conditioned to say yes. And if you say no, and also there's this like toxic hustle culture of like, have a side hustle. You should always say yes. You get up at 5 a.m. and do the thing. And if you're not accomplishing stuff and making money, you're not trying hard enough. Like, seriously, can we slow down? Can we stop valuing ourselves based on what we contribute to the GDP? Like, we're not about the money we make. There is a value to having some quality of life. It makes us better, more productive people if we sleep. Yes. I think there are a lot of pressures in our society that tell us we have to say yes, or there's something wrong with us, or we're bad people. And I think we have to learn that, if you're always saying yes to everything, you're definitely then not allowing room for, and you're saying no to other things that might matter more to you. And so one of the things I've learned on this journey is to understand, what is your why? Figure out what that why is. What is it you want in life? And figure out what you have to say no to make room for that so you can go after that thing, whatever it is. And I think people also don't feel they can put themselves first. And so they are resistant to that idea.
What you just said is so important. And it reminded me of a couple of moments in my career as an attorney where I didn't realize at the time that I was doing something really important. But I said there were a couple pivotal points in my career where I said no. Mm-hmm. And it was more of a just in my gut to say yes just felt so bad that it forced me to say no.
Sometimes that happens too.
But in retrospect, it was really, really career defining. And I had somebody else point it out to me later because they were like, you've always been so good about saying no. And I'm thinking, who have you been watching? Because I am the worst. Somebody comes up like,
maybe once I did it right.
Yeah, they'll be like, can you do me a favor? I'll be like, yes, without even knowing what it is. I'm terrible about it.
What?
Yeah, but in these couple of moments, I was just very clear that was not how I wanted my career to go. But I think that is an important part of it. And it goes back to what you were talking about with the hustle culture. We so often we get stuck in these ruts where we're just going through the motions.
I'm on this track. I can't get off now.
Yeah. And we lose sight of where the track's even going. And it's going around in circles. Mm-hmm. And so I think oftentimes we have to step back and say, I know I had to do this. And I'm curious if you had to do this as well. When I started Monarch and left the legal world, I had to redefine what success meant to me. Mm-hmm. Because success in the legal world is how many hours you can bill, how many clients you have, how many, trials you've been to. It's all of these very metric-based things, and how much money you make, of course, right? And when I first started Monarch, of course, I wasn't making what I made as a lawyer, but I had to redefine what success looked like to me. And I think that's an important part of having a better guidepost for when to say no.
Your North Star.
Yes, because if you say, you know what success to me now is? Having the time to spend with my family. Mm-hmm. Being able on a gorgeous day like today to be like, you know what? I'm taking the afternoon off and going out with a friend. Or not being tied to my phone all the time. Being able to go on a vacation and actually enjoy it. And if you can first get clear on what success means to you, then I think it makes it easier to figure out which things to say no to. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we say on our podcast a lot is the no is in service to the yes. Mm-hmm. Right? And so you have to be clear about what is it you want out of life. And you don't have to have all the answers, but I want to be a little bit less tired. Mm-hmm. I'm tired. I don't want to be working 18 hours a day. So you figure out how you stop doing that. I have so many things swirling in my head that I want to share with you. I'm like, where do I start? So a couple of things I want to touch on that you talked about. One is when it came to my business, a big thing I've learned, and it's taken a while to get there. When I started, I'd take any client. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care who you are. Like, yeah, I need the business. I'll take you. As time has gone on, we've learned, and this comes, Clever Girl is named after what my grandmother called me. She was a Marine in World War II. She was a social justice activist. She graduated from college at age 59. Like, she's like my hero. Amazing. And she had super high standards. She took me with her to march for the ERA. She is my North Star, right? Mm-hmm. She's my example of what a good human is. And she would always say to me when I would do things wrong or write something or use the word ain't, she would say, "You're a clever girl. You know better than that. Try again. You can do better than that." And so as I've been building my business, I've been thinking about that. And as time has evolved, we've started to think about, well, what are we really doing? Why are we doing this? And understanding my why is I want to make the world a better place. I want to help people. I'm a maker, yes, but I'm also a human who cares about the world. And so now we're really focusing on the types of clients that share our values. And so I've had to turn away and say no to other kinds of clients. So not that I don't think they're great people or that their businesses are worthy, but like if I only have so many resources and so much time, I'm going to help the nonprofit that's, doing really amazing conservation work rather than some equity fund, right? Mm-hmm. It just aligns. So I've had to say no there. And that there is a big fear around that because you have to be confident that the work is out there when you say no to something else. But because I've said no, there's room for the things I care about. The other thing I want to touch on is you mentioned looking at other people and seeing how easy it is for them. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's not. You just are seeing, it's like the proverbial duck on the water and they're just gliding along, but underneath they're like furiously paddling, right? You don't know what's going on inside, right? But especially when I started on this journey, I really thought about a few different people in my life, a couple of colleagues who are business owners, a person who's in my family, who I could see seemingly not having a problem with saying no, setting boundaries around things, and being assertive about it. And so there are lots of tricks, like having that accountability partner where you're struggling, they like kind of help you and you can talk it through. But I would also be like, what would so-and-so do? I could just kind of visualize how would they say it, I've even called them up at times and said, "Hey, I'm struggling with this thing. How would you handle it?" So like almost like a mentor or and also when you're thinking about it more, when you're on this journey, when you start saying no every day, you start noticing it around in the culture and you start becoming more aware of those who are good at doing that. And it just kind of supports the behavior. And I should say that it takes practice. It just takes practice. And there's this wonderful thing about our brains, this neuroplasticity where we can learn new things. We can literally rewire our brains, but it takes repetition. And so doing it every day, making a habit of it is really a key part of all of that. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, you're not. You're not. You were leading into something I wanted to talk about because I agree with you that it's building a muscle. Mm-hmm. And we, have done several episodes on having difficult conversations and how that is a muscle as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say no to having those conversations because they know they're going to be uncomfortable and scary, but they're so important.
We want people to like us.
Yes.
That was my big problem.
Yes.
I want you to like me. Don't be angry.
And I think as professionals, we fall into that trap too. I see that happen a lot with people who are newly promoted to manager or in HR in general, because HR is predominantly female. And so the things that you were talking about were taught to be people pleasers. And a lot of people who end up in HR are people pleasers and they want to be helpful. And so they take on things that they probably shouldn't. One of my biggest beefs, and I talk about this in trainings with my HR folks all the time, but it always seems like HR is the one who plans the holiday party. And I'm like, why are you planning a party?
Yeah, no.
That's not in your job description. No. You're being taken advantage of. Like
also outside of HR, it's the women in the office.
Absolutely.
Always.
Absolutely. So like that's an example of something you should say no to.
Right.
Not unless they're going to pay you extra or it's something you really, really, really enjoy.
Right.
But, and if you really, really enjoy that, then I need to talk to you because you can plan all my parties because
maybe you should be in a different career.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Maybe you should be a party planner. And then managers, oftentimes what I see with them is when they get promoted to manager, now they're the boss of their coworkers and they want to stay friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't tell their now subordinates or direct reports, no.
Mm-hmm.
They keep things as, the friendship and they let them walk all over them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good either, because part of being a strong leader is being able to say no and to set by example, showing other people how to say no.
Yeah.
So how have you balanced that as an owner of your own company, as a boss?
Okay. So before I answer the question about with my business, as you were speaking, a vivid memory came up from my mid-20s when I was promoted, and I suddenly became the manager of my friends. And one of my friends did something kind of inappropriate and made another employee uncomfortable. And I had to have a conversation with her. And she did not take it well. She was very angry and was just cut me off as a friend from that point on. And I had to learn that the people you work with may be friendly with you, but they're not necessarily your friends. And there are different levels of friendship. Some are deep friendships, some are surface level, some are somewhere in the spectrum. And you have to kind of learn, and it's a hard thing to do sometimes. You kind of have to learn who you can open up to and who you can't. And so that was a very early lesson, and in like the boundary of how open you can be with certain people. And so one of the things I've learned in this journey, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I now believe it was CPTSD. I had a very difficult upbringing. And people who've gone through some of the traumas I've gone through have issues with boundaries. And one of those issues is being immediately open with everybody, right? Telling them all the TMI stuff, right? Now I know, like I'll meet someone and they will just tell me these very personal things, and I will just kind of sit back and think, well, this is someone who does not know about boundaries, and they do not have healthy boundaries. And so like I've had to learn like what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So I think we all kind of need to sit and gauge, like, am I one of those people that like immediately meet someone and I start telling them all about my period every month? You don't want to share that stuff with everybody in the workplace. And so when it comes to my business now, I feel like I'm very open with everybody in that it's a welcoming, safe space. I make it very clear from the interview. I say, tell me about yourself. And they're like, well, I went to college at so-and-so and I studied this and I interned here. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Is it cats or dogs? What do you like better? Do you have any kids? Like, tell me about your life. What do you do in your spare time? Like, I want to know who you are as a human, because often you get insights about people. And when we're meeting and stuff, like I see the human first, right? But I also know like they're not my friend. I'm not going to share them all the details of my finances and my personal life and all the things. So it's sort of a line. You have to figure out where that is of like, I see you as a human. I'm relating to you as my human self. And also, we are in a work relationship, you're not my sister.
Right. Well, and I think for a lot of our listeners, that is challenging. I know for a lot of our HR professionals, it can feel very lonely because in HR,
you have to keep all the secrets.
Yes, everybody comes to you with their problems. You can't really go to anybody other than somebody else within HR. You can't vent to people. You've got to have a certain level of discretion. And, so it can sometimes feel lonely because I often hear from my HR professionals that I work with, like they feel like they can't let people in. They have to have this wall. So it's hard for people to see that they are human, that they are just a person, and that can be challenging. But then I've also seen HR people who are like the person you were just describing, who they're telling everybody everything about their lives. And you're like, oh, this does not reflect well on HR.
Yeah.
Like if you're telling everybody your secrets, then they're not going to believe that you're going to keep theirs.
Yeah.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show.
Dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts. We out.
I've also seen HR professionals who are the ones who are telling everybody every little detail about their life. And that's like, oh, no. We have to set some boundaries. Like if you're sharing all your secrets, people aren't going to believe that you're capable of holding theirs. And that's important.
In my business, like we have a confidentiality clause with our clients. Like we are not going to share information about you. And the people who work for me also sign that clause. And and so therefore I can't be telling them about other clients. And like sometimes it's a little hard to, keep the things confidential, but like that's your job.
Yep.
That's your job. That's part of the job, literally part of the job description. And so, get a therapist.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think that it can be really empowering for others as well. One of the things that we were talking about on your podcast, again, that's a hard no.
Thank you.
Is that when you show somebody how to say no, that can be empowering for that person.
Lead by example.
Yes. And so if you're an HR professional and somebody comes up to you and starts gossiping about somebody else, and you tell them, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. Or they're being nosy and they're trying to get details on, oh, I just saw so-and-so in your office. What was that all about? I can't say anything, or I won't say anything, which is even more powerful, because that person came to me in confidence. And if you came to me in confidence, I would want you to know that I would not be telling anybody.
Exactly.
So setting those examples, I think, is really important. And I think the other important lesson is you're teaching your employees how to potentially say no. And one thing I wanted to talk to you about was also being able to recognize when someone else may need to say no, but they don't quite know how to, because as you said, it's been a journey for you. And I'm going to use Trisha as an example. I know she won't be upset about it. But as I mentioned, she couldn't be here today, and she was trying her damnedest to figure out a way to do it, and she's in northern Michigan. The Wi-Fi is not great. She's also in the middle of dealing with, her parents' health issues and going to doctor's appointments and all of that. And she's, sends me this frantic text with, okay, here's what's going on, and I'm going to do my best and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no. Take this off your plate.
Yeah.
Take this off your plate.
Yeah.
You do not need to be worrying about this. Your focus needs to be on your parents.
Right.
And I think that part of being a leader is recognizing when somebody is trying to say no and validating that they have the right to say no.
Oh, absolutely.
And giving them the out.
Yeah. So in my world, it goes both ways. So there are times when I'm working with someone and I can see they're trying to accommodate, and I will say, I can see this is hard for you. You totally can say no. This is not mission critical, or this can be put on a back burner, or in a personal situation, I can see someone struggling and they're trying to do all the things. They're trying to fit it all in, and the equation I do in my head, and sometimes I have to say it for them, is this adding any benefit to your life, or is this just making your life harder? I don't want to make your life harder, right? If you're going to get something out of this, great. let's figure if it isn't, the thing we want to do together isn't quite going to work for you in the way we've presented it. Let's figure out how we can change things so that we're both getting something out of it. But maybe this is not going to benefit you, and maybe someone else can do it better. As I don't know if I said it now or during the earlier interview, like no one's irreplaceable.
Right.
Like when it comes to work, like you can find help. On the flip side, with my team, they know how much I struggle with this, and we're in another growth phase, and I'm doing a lot of new business development. So a lot of the hands-on technical work that I would normally do, like I'm bottlenecking it because I'm having trouble letting it go and saying so-and-so can do this and so-and-so can do that. So we'll have our weekly stand-up meeting, and we'll talking through the roster of clients and the things, and I'll be like, well, I can do that. And someone will be like, they'll speak up and they'll be like, no, so-and-so, can you send that email for Heather? Because, and like they're getting to the point where they're just like, no, you can't do that right now. We're going to have so-and-so do it. And it's just this reminder, that that they can do that. And the other thing that happens is I recently handed over stuff I love to do to a member of my team. And it's very creative. And I'm a maker. I love to make things and think design and all that stuff. But I have so much on my plate. And so I handed over this chunk of work to someone. And I felt so much relief. And I realized I had to have humility to be like, it doesn't have to be me. This other person could probably do it better than me. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes the saying the no is, can someone else do it better? If someone asks you to do something, if this is that FOMO with a potential client, am I really the right fit or can someone else do it better? I had an instance where I agreed to work on a project with a client. It wasn't really in our wheelhouse, but I was willing to learn because that's what I do. I'm a professional learner, basically. I was willing to learn and figure it out and do it for them. And there was just, we were coming from two different places. His expectations of what he was going to get are totally different from mine. It wasn't going to work out. And so I basically resigned from the project, gave him his money back, said, I'm really sorry it worked out this way. Here are some other people I think might do it better. And that was a big lesson in like, if you feel in your gut, I'm not sure I'm the right person, you're probably not. And you won't be doing a service for them, you'll be doing them a disservice. And so you have to be able to be humble about some of that stuff. You're not always the greatest and smartest in the room.
Yeah. I think that's so important, especially for our managers, because one of the problems that I see managers having is letting go of things. Delegating, yes. And a big part of that is, they're afraid that, they're not going to do it the way I want it done, or they're not going to do it as well as I do it.
Right.
Or, I don't have the time to teach them, or, whatever the excuse
said all of those
is.
things.
Yes, whatever the excuse is, I think it really comes down to what you just said, which is letting go of the ego.
Yeah.
That your way is not the only way.
Right.
And one of the things that I know I had to let go of as a owner of a company and when I work with people is it doesn't have to be the way that I would do it. As you just said, sometimes there's a better way. Sometimes also good is good enough.
Yes. Perfect is the enemy of done.
Yes. So sometimes saying no to perfection is a really...
Perfectionism is paralyzing.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. You're touching on all my pitfalls. Like literally, this is like the story of my life.
But I think it's really hard for a lot of people. So I think having these types of conversations is important because you don't feel so alone when you know other people struggle with it too. You know, you've had your company, you just celebrated 10 years. So, most people would look at that and be like, she's figured it all out. Yeah. Right?
No.
I haven't either.
No. Yeah, I mean, the humility is a big part of it. And I think also a big part of saying no is not reacting in the moment. I think you need to, we call it the power of the pause. Take a pause, take a breath. You don't have to answer right away. If someone asks you to say something, you say, thank you for thinking of me. Let me think about this for 24 hours. I'll get back to you. Let me see how this fits in our schedule. I'll get back to you. I need to think about this one for a minute. I need to check with my family. Whatever it is, like, take a pause. You do not have to react. And if someone is pressuring you to do something you really don't want to do, your gut's telling you, like, oh my God, I'm so busy. Then don't do it.
Right.
Like, if they're going to pressure you, then they're not going to respect your other boundaries relating to this, whatever this is. Right. And the power of the pause is really important.
Yes. I learned that early on as well, because I, as a baby attorney, you have this need to prove yourself, you know, and you want to...
Because you want to make partner, you want to get up that ladder.
Yes. And you want to seem so knowledgeable, you don't want to give away that you're a brand spanking new lawyer and that you're probably committing malpractice every other second. But, so you want to have those answers. So I used to fall into that trap where a client would ask me something and I'd feel like I had to have the answer on the spot.
Yeah.
And then what I learned over time, the longer you practice law, the longer you know, the only answer is it depends. Because
everyone's favorite answer.
Yes, because it always depends.
Yeah.
And so I do that with clients all the time, because they'll call and they'll say, hey, we have this situation, here's what's going on. And many times I'll say, you know what? I need to give this some thought, because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. And I need to think through all of the ramifications of each possibility. So let me do that. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And I'll usually give them a time so that they know, okay, we only have to wait this long. And, we'll talk through that too. Like, what do you do in the meantime? Like if it has to do with an employee who has engaged in misconduct or something, like, what do we do with that employee while we're figuring it out? I work through all of that with them, but I'm like, before we make the ultimate decision, there's a lot of things we got to figure out. So let's take the time to figure those out, you know?
Yeah.
So I think like you said, the power of the pause is very, very important. And I think that that's one of our tips that is the way to start saying no sometimes, right? Like if you can't say no right off the bat, or you're not sure you want to say no, just pause and say, I'll get back to you. Because then at least you have time to think through, am I answering yes just because I'm afraid of missing out on something, or I'm afraid of disappointing somebody? Or you can really think through your reasons and then figure out if those reasons are valid reasons to say yes, or if you really should be saying no.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some other types of situations where you have found, like, are there general themes around when you've discovered you should say no?
A big reason why you should say no is when you've made a lot of other commitments, and this other thing that comes along your way you've made promises, and this thing is going to get in the way of you making good on those promises. I think that's a big thing. A lot of us people pleasers don't want to let people down. And so we say yes, 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 but then we end up letting people down because we've taken on too much, right? So that's a big thing for me. A lot of personal stuff. I think it's in some cases, for some people, it's easier to say no in their personal life, but hard to say no in their work life. For me, it's a little different because I'm unemployable and I work for myself. So it's very easy for me to control my environment and be like, no. But when it comes to family issues, there's a lot of familial expectations. There are generations of patterns and behaviors. There's guilt. There's, you don't want to let your kids down. You want to help your kids do things. And so, it's, there are lots of times in hindsight, I realize I said yes, yes, yes. And maybe that was not the best thing for my kids. Maybe I should have said no. And I think teaching our kids healthy boundaries, teaching people no means no. I've literally had I get, let's be honest, 25 unsolicited emails a day from people trying to sell me something. And one of my no's is I've literally created a signature in Outlook called No Thanks. And when I click on it, it just says, no, thank you. Please remove me from your mailing list. And I just literally go click, 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 click. I just no, thank you. And then one time this one woman emailed me back saying, are you sure? Blah, 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 blah. And her name was Bridget. I was like, no means no, Bridget. Please do not contact me again. Like, there are people who will push. There were people who, they'll invite you to the destination wedding and it's going to cost you a plane trip and a dress and all this stuff. And you might not have the budget for it. And you're like, I love you so much. I will happily give you a gift. I will happily go to your wedding shower and see you when you come back, but I really can't afford this right now. Most people will respect that.
Right.
But there are always people who surprise you and push you and say, are you sure? Are you, oh, we'll miss you so much. One thing to know is sometimes people are just saying that because that's what you say when someone says no. Oh, we'll miss you so much. Are you sure? Whatever. And some people are going to push and be guilty, and you have to be firm. And you know, whose life are you living, theirs or yours? And so it's hard. The personal stuff I find harder than the work stuff. But then again, I'm not reporting to someone else, so it's a different situation. But those kinds of family pressures of like, we want to do this event, or can you drive me to this thing, or can you give me money for this thing? I mean, those are hard.
For sure.
And that's where you really have to like stick to your, I don't want to say guns, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. 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 And I think that you're right. And I think, again, as we were saying, this is a universal thing, and it doesn't affect you just at work. We have to say no a lot, in both work, outside of work, in our personal lives, and our professional lives. And it can feel like you're saying no to everything sometimes.
It also can feel like you're saying yes to everything.
Yes.
And you're like, why am I so tired?
Right. And if you're saying yes to everything in your personal life, you're probably saying yes to everything in your professional life. So it is an important tool to start learning. And I think that I want to start talking a little bit about some tips for people, because we always like to give our listeners tips on how to actually do the things that we're telling them to do. So what are some of you mentioned a couple at the beginning, but what are some tips through your experience in saying no that you feel could be helpful or that other people could use?
Well, the first one is be clear. Don't waffle. Don't be like, well, let me think about it. Or maybe we can revisit this in a few months. If your gut says no, then you have to find the courage to say no. Because if you don't, you're not being clear with them. They're going to keep asking, and you're just going to have to eventually say no anyway, and you're torturing yourself in the meantime, right? So just like if your gut is telling you no, then it's a no, and you just have to figure out how to say it.
I would also, not to interrupt you, but I would also say if you can't say yes immediately, say no. Like you're saying, don't leave it open unless you just need to check your calendar or something like that.
If you need to take the pause.
Right.
And some ways you can soften it.
Yes.
You can be like, thank you so much for thinking of me. Let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you tomorrow. And then you come back tomorrow and you're like, I'm so sorry. I have some prior commitments. This isn't going to work for me. So it's a way to soften it.
Yeah.
But like that, when you come back, be clear.
Right.
Like don't leave an opening for them to push.
Right. And I think, what we were talking about on your podcast is this concept of, and we've talked about it on some other episodes on wine, of being nice versus being kind.
Yeah.
And, when we don't say no to somebody, like let's say it's just a personal invitation to something, and you don't want to disappoint them. So you're like, well, I'm not sure. I just had this recently with a friend who asked me about something, and it's something I really wanted to do, but it required me to be gone for the weekend. And I, as I mentioned to you on a break, I often go back and forth to Michigan to help my mom. And I've been traveling a ton on the weekends. And I know that one of my boundaries is I can only go about 3 weekends, and even that's a lot, away from home before I need a solid weekend at home.
To recuperate.
To build back my sanity, to do whatever I need to do in my house, whatever it is. And I have learned that I need to be more mindful of that, because I used to just, if my calendar was open, if I didn't have an appointment with another human, I would be like, yes, I can do it. And I've had to start blocking things off on my calendar and just saying, no, I'm busy at that time. But in this particular situation, I was like, well, let me look. I I got to figure out which weekends I've got to cover with my mom this month and blah, 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 blah. And then I went back not shortly thereafter and I was like, you know what? It's too much. The calendar is too full.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to say no. And, yeah, it sucks. I think we were both disappointed, but at the same time, if I pushed myself to do that, the entire time I was there, I'd be thinking about all the things I needed to get done at my house.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to anybody. And it's also, as you were saying, like not fair to just leave my friend wondering,
Yeah.
because then she keeps reaching out saying like, what do you think? Do you think you're going to be able to make it? Do you think you're going to be able to make it? And then at the last second I say no. And it's like, that's even
if you leave them
crappier,
hanging, you're robbing them of the opportunity to find someone else to do whatever the thing is. Right. So it is unkind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you talked about at the beginning when you started saying no, you used to write down like nauseous and sweaty and those sorts of things.
Can't sleep at night.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for all of that, that comes along with it. Yeah. How did you get past that? Was it just practice?
Partially practice. And I literally really leaned on some of the things I've talked about. So I had that accountability partner. I thought about what would so-and-so do. I thought about why. I listened to my body. That's another big thing. Like, what does my body need right now? And, can I physically do this thing? But the writing down how you feel is so important. And so we have a 7-day tracker sheet people can download from our website. You can use habit tracker apps on your phone. You could just take notes or whatever. You can put it in your calendar. The year I did it, I just literally physically wrote it in my little day planner kind of thing. But it's important to gut check with yourself when these instances come up of like, how do I feel and why do I feel that way? And often it's we're making assumptions of what other people think that are not in reality what they're thinking. We have fears about what might happen in this relationship if I don't say yes, when in reality, that relationship won't be harmed. And if it is, maybe that's not the relationship for you, right? So tracking that over time is really, really important, and sitting with it for a minute and feeling it and acknowledging how you feel is really important. And we've had this guest on our show a few times. Her name's Joanna Hardis. She wrote this amazing book called Just Do Nothing. And the premise of it is about how people, when they feel anxiety, we all have anxiety. Anxiety is not bad or good. It's just data. It's a feeling, the feelings we get when we're uncomfortable with something. We are so conditioned to not being in any form of discomfort in any way in our society that when people feel anxiety, they instantly react so they can stop feeling it. And so they say yes out of reflex, right? And so that pause we talked about, sitting with that anxious feeling and saying, the phone rings and you see this client's name on there and you're like, your stomach sinks and you're like, oh God, I've got to talk to this guy again. Maybe that's your sign that like that client is not for you, right? Maybe that you should be saying no to that client. And literally I fired a client because of that. Like if every time this person calls me, my stomach sinks, I should not be working with this person. So it's listening to your gut, practicing the muscle, writing it down, make it a part of your daily practice, leaning on your accountability partner. Think about what your bigger picture is all about. What is it you're trying to be in this world? And know that you have a right to set those boundaries, to say no. You don't owe anybody anything. Like, yes, you have relationships and like I have a spouse and I have kids and stuff like that. But like I'm a human being too and I come first. So there. Yeah. Step it.
Well, and I also think it's important to track if the saying no, if you're afraid to say no because you're afraid of how the other person is going to react, or about having that uncomfortable conversation, I think it's important to also note how you feel once it's done.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think what they're fearing is they're trying to avoid what you were just talking about, that angst, that
they're going to hate me. Right. They're going to yell at me. The fear.
So whatever they've built up in their head, they're trying to avoid that. It usually doesn't turn out to be that bad. It usually turns out to be better than that. You get through it. You get through it. And I think for me personally, that's one of the things I started realizing, because I'm not your typical lawyer. I'm not confrontational. My nickname in law school was Queen of Nice. I'm not but at my first law firm, one of the things I realized is people weren't having those conversations, and it was driving me bonkers. And so I was like, fine, I will do it. I'll figure it out. And I would start having these difficult conversations, because what I realized is otherwise I'm continually anxious because I haven't had the conversation.
Knowing eventually you'll have to, and you're dreading it the whole time.
Yeah. So you've got all of that anxiety building up. Or I could just go have it. I always prepare. I always figure out what I'm going to say. I always sort of worst case scenario it. I always try to plan as much as possible, but just have it. Get it over with. It usually, something good comes out of it. You either get whatever was simmering out in the open, you find a way through it. Maybe you muck it up completely the first time around.
I did that.
Yeah, been there, done that. And then you go back and say, okay, you know what? I didn't handle that very well. Again, that shows leadership. But then at least you still have gotten through it, instead of just sticking your head in the sand and hoping it goes away on its own.
And not to downplay, sometimes these conversations are very difficult. And don't go the way you want, and relationships get harmed. But you have to think, you're the person sticking up for yourself. And often we need to think about, how would we defend someone else in this situation? How would we stand up for them? And are we willing to stand up for ourselves in the same way? Sort of that inner child work, right? And so I often have to think about that. Like, what would I, if it was my kid standing here, would I waffle, or would I stand up for them? And we are as valuable as the loved ones in our life, and we deserve to be stood up for. And it's, we're the ones who know best what feels right and what doesn't feel right.
Absolutely. I think that is a great summary of everything we've been talking about. We are going to have some resources in the show notes. We've got a great article from Harvard Business Review about some tips for how to say no in a professional way. And we also have an article from Asana that goes through some of the same things and even gives people some scripts that they could look at.
Very nice.
So you know how much I love scripts, everybody. So we've got that for you. We will have that in the show notes.
Can I suggest another source for scripts?
Yes.
So Sarah Knight, she's a New York Times bestselling author. She wrote this book, Since You Allow Swearing on Your Podcast, called Fuck No.
All right.
And we love this book. It was at one of our book club books. We had her on, and she literally has like Mad Libs that help you fill out. You can fill out for different situations, and very helpful. So highly recommend this book.
Okay, I will put it in the show notes,
It's very fun,
everybody.
quick read too.
Okay, great. So with that, I want to get your final thoughts, Heather, on both the wine and any final thought or that you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap up the show.
Well, I think the wine's delightful.
It's
a good summer wine.
It is.
It's nice. Yeah, it's very nice. I've been sipping on it. I refilled. It's pretty good. I'd drink it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would too.
And I would just say, it's never too late to start standing up for yourself and setting boundaries for yourself, just because you've struggled with it in the past, or you felt like a doormat in your life thus far. That doesn't mean you have to continue to live that way. And while it can be uncomfortable to set boundaries, and for other people too, to suddenly you're pushing back when you hadn't before, really it is a mental health self-care practice that takes time. But once it becomes part of your lifestyle, it is very empowering, and it's energy and life-giving. And I can't encourage it enough.
I love it. No is a complete sentence.
That's right.
Right?
We're gonna soon have merch and that's gonna be one of our first things.
Yes,
T-shirt with that on it.
Yes, no is a complete sentence.
Correct.
And when you learn to say it, you learn to, as you just said, stand up for yourself, and that helps others stand up for themselves.
Right.
And it can be a very contagious, positive thing, which we need more of in life. So, Heather, I want to thank you so much for being our guest
Thank
on
you.
Wine with
It's
HR.
been so fun.
I encourage all of our listeners to check out her podcast, That's a Hard No. It's got so many great episodes. She's got a lot of great guests, and it touches on all facets of life, not just work life.
Yeah.
So
We've got everything.
Yes. So I encourage you guys to do that. Flex that muscle. Listen to her podcast. Learn how to say no in different ways. And subscribe. That's a Hard No is also an evergreen podcast, so you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast, just like with Wine with HR. And again, we want to thank you for joining us. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.